Let's talk about peer review. This checklist is specifically made for the argument paper. There are comparable ones for the other assignments that we'll go through, but I won't go into as much detail for those. The first thing I want to do is I'll go through a section, and then I have a sample paper over here that I'm going to demonstrate what I'm looking for. So organization is worth 20% of the overall score that you get on this paper. So you're going to check and make sure that the paper has a thesis statement. And the slides that we went through for thesis statements are still in the course content. Make sure that the thesis statement is the last sentence of the introductory paragraph or paragraphs, that it is underlined, and it shows the topic and the claims. So we're going to look at that introduction first. And this is the student paper. I do have student permission to use this. And she wrote on what is anxiety, and she used quite a bit of Parker's organization. You're not required to do that, but it worked really effectively for her. So one of the things was to verify that the thesis statement is the last sentence of the paragraph, and indeed it is. But one of the first things I notice on here is that it's not underlined. And remember, you lose 5 points off the top if you don't have your thesis statement underlined. So if this were something that you were critiquing, you would tell the student that they needed to underline their thesis statement. You can put your comments in the file and then resend it to them through the discussion group, or you can write sort of line by line. You can send them notes in the discussion. Do what seems most intuitive to you, just so that you're covering the same topics. And then one of the items said to verify that it shows the topic and the claims. And so the topic is, we don't know. The topic is anxiety, but that needs to be clear in the thesis statement. So anxiety is putting your head in their unbalanced rolling cauldron of fear and chaos and feel them. So again, very similar to Parker's, and I actually enjoy that the student did that. You are not required to do that, however. And then you can look at the first sentence of every paragraph and make sure that these claims they're talking about here show up here. So the first claim the student makes is anxiety is the absence of balance, and she uses unbalanced here in her thesis statement, so that works. The next one is then fear and chaos. So if you go to her next paragraphs, anxiety is chaos, anxiety is fear. So the student did have that going for them. So it was in the right place. It needs to be underlined, but the topic should also be in that thesis statement. The next thing, if you look at the peer review checklist, is that every body paragraph should have a topic sentence, and I showed you where the student did that. Make sure the main claim for the paragraph is listed in the topic sentence. The students were, and that each claim in the thesis has its own paragraph. So sometimes, so this student did do that. So we've got a topic sentence here. Anxiety is the absence of balance. Anxiety is chaos. Anxiety is fear. Yours don't have to be that simplistic, but just to demonstrate for you. So the student did have topic sentences. A lot of times you'll find a paragraph where we've got to get 2 or 3 sentences in to figure out what the topic is. That would be incorrect. You want to make sure the first sentence is the topic sentence. Let's go back to the peer review checklist. The introduction should provide the background or context necessary to understand the writer's claim. In this particular example, it's a very short introductory paragraph, and it works because she uses Parker's essay as the model for it. If somebody wasn't aware of what anxiety is, there might need to be more explanation or more background. So if you're talking about something that is outside the norm for people, they may not know what you're talking about. So I've had students talk about, like what is a Latina or what is a Latino. You might need to give more background information here so that the student or the reader doesn't get lost. But here, this works just fine. And then the conclusion should give a sense of closure. Does the student make a compelling case? And compelling just means, did they explain so what? Why does it matter? Well, these things matter if people have a stereotypical viewpoint of us. And so your job at the conclusion is to demonstrate that. Does the student restate their main claims? These do not have to be one in a thesis style sentence, so it doesn't have to be one sentence, but they should be in some way alluded to in the conclusion. So let's look at the sample. Anxiety is not panic. It is not as simple as worry and solely feeling anxious. Anxiety is the absence of balance, so we have that again. Physically and mentally, that makes breathing difficult. Chaos, only partially able to be tamed by medicine. And fear, that makes a what if into a hyper-focused, world-ending thought that eclipses all rationality. Anxiety is scared. Do not touch it. So the student does restate those claims, but the student also leaves you with that sense of the sort of what's at stake here is that hyper-focused, being fearful kind of mentality. So the student's organization is good. We see a simple 5-paragraph essay. We have a strong thesis statement, but we would tell the student to underline it and make sure that the topic is clear, and that those are things that you can either add into the document or that you would put into the discussion post. So if you wanted to go ahead and pause the video here and go through the organization elements of the paper that you're critiquing, and then come back to the video and unpause for the rest. Next, we're going to look at development. Development is worth 20% of the overall score. Oops, sorry about that. It creates unity by having a topic sentence that develops the ideas and provides coherence. The paragraph should maintain focus on one topic that's in the topic sentence. Any sentence that does not focus on the paragraph's topic or claim, you would recommend that the student writer revise it or eliminate it. Does the student demonstrate through examples and illustrations? So one of the problems with this particular assignment is students want to rant. There's something that pisses us off. We're trying to correct a misinterpretation, and we just want to kind of verbally yell on the page. That's not providing examples and illustrations. So the evidence comes from your lived experience. Make sure to define terms that somebody else might not be familiar with, and you can make comparisons if that makes your job simpler. Does the student analyze or explain the examples? This one's really key. Don't just throw out those examples and expect the reader to follow your logic. If you remember in Parker's essay, she uses this line. She's talking about all the things that smell funny, and she uses a line something like that. Everything smells like onions, and then she explains this because onions are cheap. It's simple. It didn't take a lot of space to explain that, but some of your examples may need explaining. And if you are reading somebody's paper and you don't understand the connection between their example and their topic, all you have to do as the critiquer is say, I don't understand. It's their job to fix it, not yours. You're just pointing out that this example needs more explanation. So that's part of that analysis or explanation is, what does the example mean? It may be cause and effect. It may be a comparison, but make sure that's explicit on the page for the student. Note any sentence or phrase that repeats a previously stated idea. This is the one I said I sometimes will draw this sort of winding circle on a student's page because they keep saying the same thing over and over in different words. What your job is not to fix it, but just to say, rather than restating this, can you think of another example or another explanation? Don't make sure that the student doesn't focus or that note, well, back up a minute. Any sentence or idea that changes focus, you would tell the student reader that's off topic. This may not be the best place for it. All right, so let's look at the sample and see what we see as far as development goes. We'll just look at her very first body paragraph. Anxiety is the absence of balance. It is a chemical problem in the brain, a physical inability to be calm or to focus on one thing. So the student is almost giving us a medical definition. And then goes into more explicit through personal experience. It is a broiling pot of thoughts on everything and anything and how it could go wrong. And then she makes this concession. Some would tell me to just breathe, but how can I breathe when my body doesn't remember I have lungs? So that gives very specific, concrete details from personal lived experience. The brain has forgotten to send signals to the organs that maintain consciousness, causing the unbalance to tip further over the threshold of unhealthy hyperventilation. So she goes with this first. The brain has forgotten to send signals, which is more medical or more definitional. And then after the colon, causing the imbalance to lead to hyperventilation. So again, we've got the specific detail, and then we have personal lived experience. Anxiety is blind to its surroundings, deaf to the words of help and calming outside action. Unlike panic, anxiety is physical. So this is a comparison, right? Picture. And so first the explanation, or first a simple statement, and then an example from lived experience. Picture sitting quietly in my own little world of calm, listening to music, eyes shut, fending off an attack of anxiety before a test in a future class. Minding my own business when suddenly the comfortable silence is ripped from me by a bang on the table I sit at. The sound startles me so horribly that I have no control over my legs as I run out of the classroom and collapse on the ground outside the bathroom, unable to open the door with no strength, crying and unable to breathe. So all of that is an example of anxiety from lived experience. It could be called panic on steroids, yet with no immunity to dampen the negative effects. And so in this, the student is coming to a conclusion. So if you look back at what the student is supposed to do, maintaining focus on one topic, everything in there was about that imbalance that's there. I didn't see any sentences that strayed from their focus. So if she suddenly started talking about going shopping and having and you know, the worry is not the same as anxiety. Worry is not about imbalance, so that would not belong there. Does the student demonstrate through examples and illustrations? Yes, there were examples from her lived experience. She defined terms in her own way, and she made comparisons between anxiety and panic. Does the student analyze or explain the examples? I went through there, and yes, she did. She talked more about comparisons than cause and effect, although there was cause and effect in test anxiety and then passing out in front of the bathroom. As far as I noted, there wasn't anything that was repetitive, and everything stayed on focus. So if you want to pause here and then run through the body paragraphs and make sure they're developed fully, looking at the checklist, then come back when you're finished. All right, so when you're back and you're looking at assignment specific, that's worth 20% of your grade. So you're going to look at the assignment prompt and verify the student completed the requirements. One of those requirements that students often forget is that it needs to be a minimum of 750 words. So if you look at this paper, you'll notice down here it tells us how many words there are. There are 767 words. I don't know if that's available in the online version of Word, but I know it's available if you have the version on your computer. For the argument paper, make sure the student has a concession. It doesn't have to follow the words "but you say" type of concession, but it should be followed by a counter argument. Now I know because of this student, she did it in every paragraph. You don't have to do this, but she basically made a concession in each paragraph and then a counter argument of why that wasn't true. So in this paragraph, she says, "But you say there is medicine." Yes, however, semicolon, only for those who have access to it. And that's, so you see this, "but you say, what about medicine?" There's the concession. And then this portion here is the counter argument. And the rest of that paragraph talks about not having access. So make sure that the student has the right word count. Make sure that the student has a concession and a counter argument, and then come back to the video. All right, so this next one is if you're comfortable with grammar, make sure you mark it up and tell the person where the grammar is incorrect. If you're not, one of the things you can do is run the papers through Grammarly. You can copy and paste it. Grammarly is an app. I use it on my computer, but you can also just copy and paste a paper into Grammarly on the Grammarly website, and it will tell you some of your grammar errors. I'm not a fan of paying for Grammarly, but you can use it to check your grammar. You can also use Microsoft Word. So if you look at review, they have read aloud. Read aloud is really beneficial. If you have it read aloud your own paper, you will oftentimes find your own mistakes. But then you can also look at proofing. So we're going to have it do a spell check. And there were no spelling errors. If there were, so let me put in weird stuff. So when it has a red underline, that means it's a misspelling, and you can help the person with spelling. If it has a blue underline, let's see if I can force it to do that. No, usually a blue line means you have a comma in the wrong place. It doesn't look like it's this student didn't have any grammar errors, so I can't demonstrate that, but you can and should use the software to help you find some of your grammar errors. The next one is MLA, and I'm going to go back and forth through this, and then you can verify it with the papers that you're peer reviewing. So MLA is worth 10% of the grade. We spent the first couple weeks in class working on MLA, so you should be much more confident. So first, you're going to make sure that the name block is present on the upper left hand of the first page only. So that's right here. So it would be first name, last name. I personally allow for use the name that you use. Like if your legal name is Robert, but you go by Andrew, then use Andrew on the paper because I want you to use the name that you go by. So first and last name here, Professor Skaggs here, English 121 and whatever the second part of this is, and then the date in this particular order. Notice there's no commas. Then go back, check that there are one inch margins. And this is harder. I can usually tell visually that this is a 1 inch margin, but you can go into layout and margins and see what it's set at. If it's set at normal, it's 1 inch all the way around. Where it becomes a problem is some of the older versions of Word, particularly for Mac, use 1 1/4 inch margins. So double check for the student because that's not something we often think to do for ourselves. Verify the first line of the paragraph is indented 1/2 inch. This is what it looks like if there's no indent. So you want to make sure that each paragraph has that indentation at the start and that it's the same throughout. And it is. Verify the header has the last name and page number in the upper right. So that's up here, last name and page number. Again, it's not your job to fix it necessarily. You can help the student if you want, but you can just, circle it or put a note in the discussion that says they need to add their last name and the page number up here. Verify it's double spaced. This is double spaced. You may not be able to tell it, but if you select and you go up to Format, Paragraph, it will tell you that's first line indent by 1/2 inch, and then it will tell you the line spacing is double. If it says multi or if it's blank, that means there's many different line spacing throughout that section that you've highlighted, and that's where you're going to want to make sure it gets changed back to double. Verify it's Times New Roman 12 font. You may not be able to tell, but again, if you go into the Home tab, it says right here that it's Times New Roman 12. Verify it has a title, and I like something a little more creative than rhetorical analysis or argument. So this student put, what is anxiety? No works cited page is needed for the argument of definition. The source is you and your lived experience, and you don't have to put that in the paper at all. So that's what I'm looking for peer review. If you know how to, you can add comments to the document itself and re-upload it into the discussion, or you can just write a list in the discussion of all the things that you notice that could be fixed. You can work with each other in your small groups to verify that you're all doing it the same way, or ask each other questions about how to do it so that you can all use the same system so nobody feels like they're getting gypped. If you have any questions about peer review, let me know. The peer review checklist that's in the course content is correct as of today. All right, guys, good luck. Have a great week.